Today is the fourth message in the Come and See series that KO initiated in January. Actually, you can say this is the fifth in the series that KO initiated in January, because last week, due to weather and my illness, we did not do this sermon or this message. And KO instead went to the next chapter, chapter 4 of John, and introduced us to the Samaritan woman. And that actually works well with being a contrast to what we're going to hear about today. It provides a great contrast. Today we find Nicodemus sneaking around in the dark to meet Jesus. He'd heard of the signs surrounding Jesus, providing wine for a wedding where the host was about to run out, the cleansing of the temple to clear a path for those seeking God. He wanted to meet this person who was garnering all the attention, to see if there was more to Jesus than just the stories he'd heard. But the reason he was doing this clandestinely is that Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and he was a member of the Sanhedrin, a ruler of the Jews. So this is somebody who was in charge of enforcing the Jewish laws and meting out punishment for not obeying the laws. And so here he is meeting with somebody that the Pharisees really didn't like a whole lot. So it was really not a good idea for somebody in his position to be seen meeting with Jesus. It would have been helpful for Nicodemus if he would have heard the story of the Samaritan woman before he met Jesus. Unfortunately, the story of meeting the Samaritan woman happens after Nicodemus meets with Jesus. And it would have given Nicodemus a chance to understand what Jesus was talking about. It's ironic that this is also the second time that Jesus mentions a Samaritan in his teachings. If you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus holds up the Samaritan as being the person who does good. There's a person on the side of the road that is hurt and needs help, and members of the ruling class and the priests avoid this person to make sure that they stay clean. The Samaritan, who is what these people think is probably the lowest form of human being on the planet, is the one that actually goes and helps this person. So this story is as much about talking about how good the Samaritan was, but is just as much an indictment of the ruling class of religious leaders at that time. So Nicodemus meets Jesus at night, protecting himself and providing contrast. Nicodemus is in the dark compared to the Samaritan woman who meets Jesus in the light. And Jesus spoke with him, but he told him he had a choice. Either you stay in your comfortable position or realize that times have changed. Nicodemus needed to look at his faith from a different perspective, an allegorical being born of the Spirit. When I first thought about Nicodemus' position, I thought about some of the events happening in the world today and how the current events could fit into this story. But I also didn't want to say anything that would improperly cross any lines. And a week and a half ago, we had the Reverend Phyllis Stutzman from the Emporia Presbyterian Church come into Westminster to teach me and several of the ruling elders what they needed to do and how they needed to provide communion so that we can provide communion while KO is on sabbatical this year. And when I got done with that training, I was speaking to her and I kind of mentioned that I was going to be doing this message. And I said I was struggling with how to bring the past and the present together in this one. And she threw out a line very quickly. She said, Nicodemus and Jesus were living in troubled times, just as we're living in troubled times today. And I'm like, that's it. Thank you, Phyllis. But a night or two later, when I start working on these sermons, I have nights where I just don't sleep because I'm writing and rewriting in my head. And I see myself up here talking, and it's just, I want to do it right, and I know no matter what I do, it's not going to be right. But it's all going through my mind, and I'm writing and rewriting, and it's when it dawned on me that what she said is basically a paraphrase of one of the most famous opening two lines in literature. Charles Dickens said it in the 1800s in A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And depending on where you're at in life, it's true for everybody. Every day is the best of time or the worst of times for everybody. It just depends on your perspective. And so, for me, notwithstanding the birth of my children and my grandchildren and the marriage of my wife, Jenny, I will choose to introduce you to the time of my life that I consider to be the best, at least the most carefree. And for me, that would have been the 1970s. And the reason I say that is because in the 1970s, I went from being a preteen to a teenager graduating high school. And the 1970s were great for me because, one, I loved astronomy and the space program. And NASA was sending people to the moon, and that was awesome. Now, 1969, I was young enough that I have fairly vague memories of the actual first moon landing. But in 1970, when Apollo 13 took off, I can remember having heated discussions on the playground using the merry-go-round as the Earth to talk about how if Apollo 13 came back into the Earth, the Odyssey command module came back into Earth at too flat an angle, it would skip off and go into space and be lost forever. If it came in at too steep an angle, it would burn up and they would be lost. So I remember this being an argument on the playground. The 1970s were also good for me because school didn't seem to be very hard at the time. It all went fairly easy. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time studying, something I would regret later when I actually went to college, but that's just how it goes. You eventually learn. The 1970s were fun for me because I learned how to drive. I gained freedom. I was able to move at will. I love the 70s because I love the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's not just because they won 4 Super Bowls. My dad played fast-pitch softball, and on his team was a kid from college working summers in south central Kansas on a pipeline and playing fast-pitch softball and playing shortstop for the team my dad was playing with. His name was Terry Bradshaw. So I got to be a bat boy for a softball team that Terry Bradshaw played for. So I had a vested interest in the Pittsburgh Steelers besides the fact that they were winners. It was just nice that they were. I also had a friend that had a boat that his dad had that his dad didn't use. So weekends during the summer, we could jump in a car, pull the boat to Lake Canopolis, and go water skiing, or what was also kind of fun was racing cars that were driving along the dam to see if we could go faster than the cars that were on the highway. I was able to play all the sports that I was interested in. It was a wonderful time. But let's look at the 1970s from a slightly different perspective. We entered the 1970s still in the Vietnam War. Every night, the evening news had the body counts. How many killed, how many wounded, how many missing. Every night. Let's see, 1972, the Olympics should be a good time, right? Terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes in Munich. Sticking to 1972, we had a president that did so many misdeeds during the election cycle that he was eventually forced to resign. Because if he didn't resign, he would have been taken out of office by Congress. They were at that point. Let's see, what else happened in the 70s? Oil crisis, early 70s. Oil crisis, late 70s. In the late 70s version, there was gas rationing. Thankfully, we lived in Kansas, so we didn't really have the gas rationing here, but there was gas rationing on the coast. 3 Mile Island, nuclear meltdown. National Guard members killing 4 people and wounding 9 at Kent State. Unarmed students. Let's see, we were in Cold War with the USSR the whole time, so we had the threat of nuclear annihilation going the whole time. And then just to add icing to the cake, to close out the 70s, I was on the Hill at the University of Kansas in November of that year watching KU and K-State play a football game, 2 of the programs at that time that were the most pathetic football programs in the history of the country. But I had a vested interest in both schools when it came down to it because I was born in Manhattan when my parents were at K-State, and I eventually attended KU. But while we were sitting on the hill, because it was free to watch the game from the hill when you're a high school student, they made an announcement over the PA system. 52 Americans had been taken hostage at the American embassy in Iran. That's how we closed out the decade. So, what I just gave you is actually pretty much an abridged list. But what was that quote about history? Oh yeah, those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. Conversely, people who look at history with so much fondness that they think it was the greatest thing since sliced bread forget all the bad things. So in the 70s were wonderful for me, but for most people they weren't. And so trying to live in the past is not necessarily a good thing. The earth and God keeps moving us forward. And so times change and people have to change, and sometimes your beliefs have to change. And Nicodemus, in this case, was living in the past. And he was comfortable because he had been inserted into a position where he had the power. He was comfortable. But he's coming to meet Jesus and to find out. So Jesus offers a new life to Nicodemus when Nicodemus comes to see him. And this is with someone who belongs to a group who despises Jesus, and yet Jesus tells him exactly who he is. And he also says what Martin Luther called the gospel in miniature, and the youth read it to you earlier. It's John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. And that's the paradigm shift. That's the shift that invites everybody into the body of faith, because God so loves the world. And that means everybody. And like I told the children, it's regardless of your color, your race, who you love, your ethnicity, your gender, it doesn't matter. Nothing excludes you from God's love, even if you reject God's love. It also means that somebody who looks like most of you and me can be included in that body of faith. And you might think I'm saying that in jest, but I'm not. If I could be magically transported back 2,000 years into the Holy Land around Jerusalem, I would have been one of the most foreign-looking human beings that Jesus would have ever seen. Jesus' travels took him from northern Galilee to Egypt, a distance of roughly 400 miles. That's the width of Kansas, folks. That's how far his travels took him. He would have seen people that looked like him, of the Jewish faith. He would have seen people from the Middle East. He would have seen, of course, Romans, because, they were kind of ruling the roost at that point in time. He would have seen people from Africa. What he would not have been used to seeing is people of Northern European heritage. And so for me coming into his land at that point in time, I would have been a total outsider, a total immigrant. And the funny thing is that if I had gone up to speak with Jesus and asked to be taught, or if I was hurt and asked to be healed, or if I was hungry and asked to be fed, he would do it, even though I was an immigrant in his land. The paradigm shift tells us that Jesus tells Nicodemus is necessary for us to inherit the kingdom. You must feel the Spirit and live into the light, how the Spirit is moving. To have empathy, show compassion, help those who need help. I can't lay my hands on somebody who is ill and have them instantly be healed. But I can recognize somebody who needs help and is ill and get them to somebody that can help them. I can lift somebody that has fallen and not laugh at the fact that they have fallen. I can share the abundance I've been given. And these are not signs of weakness if I help in these ways. These are signs of strength. Returning one last time to my carefree decade, My favorite band at the time released a song paraphrasing the lines of A Tale of Two Cities just after the decade ended, and it was called The Best of Times. The song closes with the revelation that one day we'll find these are the best of times. As the psalmist said, "This is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." We can choose to walk in the Spirit in the light and to be the light to the world or to remain in the darkness. We can do something to be a light to the world. For the Samaritan woman, it was a very fast transformation. She got it right away, and she went out and started spreading the news. For someone like Nicodemus, it was a slow transformation. He eventually gets there. 35 years ago, Gatorade came out with a slogan that really boosted their sales. It was built around Michael Jordan's athletic ability. It was the Be Like Mike campaign. And if you or I drank enough Gatorade, we would be able to take a running jump from the free throw line, travel 15 feet in the air, and dunk a basketball at a rim that's 10 feet up in the air. Or so the theory went. Theoretically, that's how we could do it. The reality is, most of us can't. And probably nobody in this room at any point in their lives is going to jump 15 feet and dunk a basketball that's 10 feet high, on a rim that's 10 feet high. Wouldn't it be better, instead of trying to be like Mike, if we tried to be more Christ-like, to have empathy, to show compassion, to help those in need? You know, be like Christ. After all, that's what being a Christian means.